Hello, everybody, and welcome to the November 21st, 2018 edition of the Ephrom Josine Show. I am your host, Ephrom Josine. Now, yesterday we covered Ivanka Trump completely breaking the law. However, we also haven't had time to really talk about just how wrong she is about everything. Now, Ivanka Trump is supposed to be much more liberal than Donald, and honestly, she strikes me as an idealist than anything else. Or you know what, that's unfair. How about an opportunist designed to get the left in on her father's presidency, which just isn't working? Here's something she tweeted recently. 4 out of 5 white women behind bars are mothers. When you incarcerate a woman, you incarcerate her entire family. No, you don't. You only incarcerate that woman. It doesn't make any sense. Stand with us in calling on Congress to pass the hashtag First Step Act and help restore dignity for incarcerated women. Hashtag dignity for incarcerated women. Why didn't you just hashtag that the first time? Now, I'm a critic of the U.S. criminal justice system. Don't get me wrong. However, am I the only one who finds the idea that we're unfair to white mommies to be kind of ludicrous? I mean, 4 out of 5 women who are in jail are mothers. Now, let me try and figure out why that is. How about maybe that's because mothers are 4 times as likely to commit crimes than single women. Or childless women, my bad. Just maybe I'm just kind of simple like that. Or maybe it's also the crimes people do for their family are much different than the crimes they do when they're single or even in a relationship but don't have children. Typically, someone who's not in a relationship or has no children will get busted for what? Smoking a few ounces of pot? The women who go to jail with children typically steal things to pay for the children because the Republicans have ruined our welfare system. Congratulations! It also makes sense she's promoting this at about this time, considering that the Republicans are trying to do their attempt at criminal justice reform after not caring about the issue and calling it sympathy for felons for about 20 to 30 years now. Now, does their prison reform bill include, for instance, abolishment of private prisons, any significant changes to the war on drugs, at least reduction in mandatory minimums for nonviolent drug sentencing, or any changes to current death penalty laws? Of course not. Why would they? But whatever is in it, despite the fact those are really the only forms of criminal justice reform that make sense, I mean, besides just very basic rehabilitative reforms, which have had results depending on the criminal, I'm out of ideas at that point. Those aren't the ideas that are being talked about. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted, "The hashtag First Step Act is an important reform to rehabilitate prisoners to re-enter society productively. It also begins the process of fixing the mistakes of the Clinton crime bill. We should all stand for justice." Again, he doesn't say what's actually in those reforms, just that Bill Clinton did a bad thing. Well, okay, he probably did do a bunch of bad things. I'll admit that. How are you going to fix it? I don't know. Anyway, Candace Owens also retweeted Donald Trump Jr.'s tweet with, "As a reminder, there is no president that locked up more black men than at Bill Clinton." Maybe that's because they were committing more crimes under Bill Clinton. Although, again, I could just be a little simple like that. With his faithful, I guess that's a joke, wife Hillary Clinton by his side, I laughed out loud when people said they were hashtag with her because Trump was a racist. The super predator Clintons think blacks are stupid. No, even assuming that quote was in context, which it isn't, they think you're smart enough to be predators. But even then, she was talking about the ones that committed crimes. Now, I will agree with you that, for instance, the black men who were imprisoned for smoking a few ounces of pot or something, yeah, they shouldn't be in jail. The ones who, say, shot people, which happened quite a bit, should be. I'm sorry, I just can't stand the fact that now conservatives are taking the worst possible aspects of hippieism and putting it in their political philosophy. Anyway, our main story tonight involves our old pal Matt Walsh, who, if you don't know, could safely be called the most factually inaccurate conservative on all of the internet that I've covered so far, which I didn't even realize was possible. Worse than Owens, worse than Rose, worse than any of them. He absolutely shows the worst in the evangelical movement, the pro-life movement, and the millions of other movements he's assigned himself towards. And, of course, while not as known, the anti-ADHD movement, which claims it just does not exist, despite the CAT scans we have that prove it exists, and the mental data we have that proves it exists, and the thousands of books that prove they exist. But he has a column on thedailywire.com, so you know he's right. Here's what he had to say. This may take a minute to break down because there's a lot to say on this. I can barely stand to write a sentence like this. I'm sorry, it's just... I promised myself I would cry. Last week, a 9-year-old girl hanged herself. It should be hung. In case you're wondering, his source for that is the New York Post? Matt, you're not very smart, but you're smarter than that. For those who do not know, the New York Post is a literal tabloid. But okay. Her name was Maddie Winsett. She was in 4th grade. Her parents say that Maddie came home from school that day in fine spirits, seemingly excited about a trip to Chick-fil-A. No wonder Matt attached himself to this story. But when Maddie's mother went to her room to tell her it was time to go, she found the child hanging in the closet. One cannot even contemplate the horror of such a scene. I'll give you that. This is a very emotional scene. It turns out Maddie was often bullied in school. Ignore this for the rest of the article because that's the only way Matt's point's going to make any sense. For that matter, do you think his points would sound better or worse if I added every one of them with, according to the New York Post? Let me try something. She had been subjected to a especially vicious round of bullying on that particular day, according to one of her friends, according to the New York Post. No doubt, this fact likely has something to do with her suicide. Oh, Matt, you can't say that. But her family suspects that something else might have had a role to play. ADHD medication, according to the New York Post. Maddie's stepfather reports that... Wait, stepfather? So she was from a separated family? Those also have high risks of suicide and depression. Why aren't you talking about that? That she had recently begun taking a new drug for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And obviously, when you take one of those ADHD meds, you die immediately. One of the drug's listed side effects is, quote, suicidal thoughts. You know, I won't deny that may have played a small role. However, I think the bullying and the separation from her family, which you completely ignored for the record, aren't you the family values guy, Matt? Aren't you the good old paleo conservative of the Daily Wire? Why aren't you talking about how families who how children who go through divorces typically have high risk of depression and suicide than those who don't? Shouldn't that be what this article is about? Or the dangers of bullying? or heck, combined all three even, and say they all played a factor, and this was like one of the ones who got the absolute worst. Okay, I disagree with some of it. Don't get me wrong. You're Matt Walsh. I disagree with you a lot. But I prefer it to this. We will never know for sure what was going on inside Maddie's mind that day. Now forget this, because it's the only way Matt Walsh's point will make any sense. But was it a coincidence that she started taking medication that causes suicidal thoughts? That's not how side effects work, you idiot. Side effects depend on the person. As in, they might cause it, not directly cause it. The only thing it directly did was medicate ADHD, you idiot. Some of this has to be on purpose, by the way. Right before she committed suicide, Matt's just asking questions. Her parents don't think so, and who could argue with them? Me, because they sound wrong. The suicide of a young child certainly seems... Okay, he then goes on for like a paragraph about how this child shouldn't even know what suicide is, which I do agree with, for the record. But okay. Sadly, stories like Maddie's are much more common than they used to be. Studies show, some people say, that the number of children attempting or contemplating, how do you calculate contemplating? That doesn't even make any sense. Has doubled. In case you're wondering, his source for that is noted scientific journal Time magazine. In the past decade. This is a multi-faced phenomenon. You keep just giving these vague allusions to it's more complex, but then ignoring them. It's really annoying. That cannot be blamed on any single one factor. Do you read your own articles? I think we make a mistake, however, when we chalk it up to bullying and barely stop to consider what the other factors might be. Family separation? That seems like it's also a factor, at least, maybe not a big one, but at least one. And maybe, to be fair, the medication didn't help. However, that doesn't mean you can blame that, which is clearly what you're trying to do, despite your nods otherwise. That's why you don't even mention the separation and say we can't blame it on bullying. I didn't even notice the fact that her parents must have been divorced. Or not married to begin with, at least, until I read the article just now, and I read it 2 times before recording this. Kids have always been bullied. Not wrong, but a little misleading. They have not always committed suicide at a high rate as this, or we just haven't been studying it as often. Maybe that's also at play? Something else is going on here. I already did that joke. As the suicide rate among children has increased exponentially, so has the number of children prescribed psychiatric drugs. Life science, Matt? That's really your source now? Are you even trying? They're like... Are they even officially recognized that, like, they're the most hippie naturalist website I can think of, at least? And they are by no means considered to be objective. And for the record, the article he cited was from 2011, 7 years ago. There are currently over 7 million kids on some kind of psychiatric medication, or psychotropic, my bad, and over half of them are being treated for ADHD. Correlation does not prove causation, but isn't there enough correlation here to make us exceedingly worry about dosing kids with this stuff? We can't prove vaccines don't cause autism, so we better just be safe. There's a reason why drug companies list, quote, suicidal thoughts as a side effect, because they're required to by law. There's a reason why health officials in Canada, don't you hate the Canadian healthcare system? I mean, it is a universal healthcare system. Now all of a sudden it's right? Have mandated that suicidal warnings be stronger and clearer. Defenders of these drugs, hey, that's me, will claim that we can't draw a straightforward connection between psychotropic meds and violent or suicidal behavior. That's true. Then what have you been doing, Matt? For the love of God, and what were you doing in your original articles on this? In the first episode of the Ephrom Josine show, we covered one of your articles where you tried and argued that ADHD wasn't real. I just can't. That's true. We know the drugs can leave a lasting mark on the developing brains of children. Tons of things can, Matt. The only way you're going to avoid that is by putting kids in a bubble. Is that what you want to do? But we don't know what sort of mark it might leave. People have been taking ADHD medications for decades, dude. We've known what this is for decades. And we've gotten better at diagnosing it. So just... or how long it will last, or how it might manifest itself. As pediatric psychologist Ronald Brown, sorry, I get these people confused sometimes, says, some people say there's more use of psychotropic medication with children than there is research data on it. We have the data, Matt. It confirms you're wrong. Objectively. But the lack of data is reason enough to refrain from giving pills to our kids. I bring you back to my vaccine example. If we don't fully understand what it might do to a child, how it might interact with his brain, we don't. Like, half of this article could just be summed up with, yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. That's not how it works. That's yes, we do. And the only ethical, prudent course is one of extreme caution. Extreme caution is not what we're seeing from drug companies. Are you a socialist now? And the medical establishment, the big bad establishment. They keep churning out the pills, shoving them down the throats of our children. Actually, I think it's the children doing that technically, but I'm nitpicking now, Matt. I'm sorry. All while issuing breezy assurances that the medication is perfectly safe. Safe? It might. This is something I've noticed, is that whenever you can't conclusively make a statement, no matter how strong it is, you always gotta say might or allegedly. Or some people say, I just can't get over that. I mean, it might have cost them that life. That's your entire article. It might have. We don't know one way or the other. Well, then why are you so strong in your opinion that it did? I refuse to believe you, honest to God, do not think there were any other factors. That you, honest to God, do think there were any other factors. If there were, you would have stressed them heavier in this article and actually spent paragraphs talking about them. But it's safe. It might. His source is WebMD, by the way. Just wanted to point that out. Alter her personality. Make her angry. Because children are never angry. Make her aggressive. Again, children are never aggressive. Make her hallucinate. You know, there are more than one ADHD medication in the world, Matt. You should know that. But it's safe. I might argue that any drug that could put through into a child's head, or put thoughts into a child's head, that's all medication for psychological issues, is by definition unsafe, especially because a thought is a function of the mind, of consciousness, and no one on earth really knows how exactly consciousness relates to the brain. People far smarter than you do, Matt. We've studied. Look up the studies yourself. I'm sorry, I don't even know it. I'm not as smart as these guys. I'm not as smart as the psychologists. But they know. They objectively know. Most notably, consciousness comes from the brain. That's the relation, Matt. You don't think with any other organ. You see your heart? You don't think with it. You see your arm? You don't think with it. You see this foot? You can't, because I'm not that flexible. But you don't think with it. Nobody knows exactly how chemical reactions in the brain could produce something like a thought. Yes, we do. Doctors and drug companies are playing into an arena they don't fully understand. My God, you're such an obnoxious hippie sometimes. We should note that child suicide is just one awful and increasingly common phenomenon of these psychiatric drugs. Mass shootings is another. Go on. Also, for the record, his citation for the next part of this article is a group called CCHRINT. A group of people so unknown that when I put them in to a Wikipedia search, or to Google search, I couldn't even find a Wikipedia page for them. Dozens of violent attacks in schools have been carried out by kids on or withdrawn. Wait, withdrawn? No, you cannot count that. I'm sorry, but if they're not on it, it doesn't count. Unless they literally stop taking it the day before. From psychiatric drugs, and not just kids. The Las Vegas shooter was on anxiety medication. The Colorado theater shooter was on antidepressants. The Charleston shooter was known to take a drug called Suboxone. You don't even know what that is, do you? The Virginia Tech shooter was on psychiatric drugs. The list goes on. In case you're wondering, the article in question lists 36 people out of the well over 1,000 people who have shot places up since the beginning of this millennium. Very scientific of you, Matt. Can prescription meds be solely blamed for any of these attacks? No, of course not. Then why do you keep doing it? But I don't think it's entirely incidental that so many mass shooters have been on psychiatric drugs. And I don't think it's incidental that Maddie Wissek committed suicide while taking a drug that might cause a child to contemplate suicide. There is a connection here, a very obvious connection, and the drug companies know it. And so do the doctors. It's time to start holding them accountable. That was the worst thing I've ever read. I'm Ephrom, and good night.